Hey, let's do a little experiment, okay? On the count of three, I want you to release your bottom jaw. Yeah, the jaw that you're clenching right now without even realizing it. That one. Ready? One, two, up. No cheating. Come on. Reclench. Thank you. Three. Feels good, huh? Here's how that clenching may track back to your gut and be influenced by when you eat your meals. Let's go. Yo, yo, yo! What is up? Welcome back to another week of How to Health. My name is Kevin. I run liftandbalance.com, where we take aim at all things health and longevity and do it in an odd, weird, interesting, and highly sarcastic way. Now, that little experiment was just a quick, overly simple way to display that this 24/7 modern world we live in have the majority of us a little more stressed and on edge than we probably should be. Especially when it comes to preserving the function and vitality of our most valuable asset, your body. And one of the most dangerous yet silent ways this stress often manifests is through elevated blood pressure, or a condition clinically known as hypertension. This is when the force of the blood pushing against your artery walls is consistently too high, making your heart work harder and putting an enormous amount of stress on the blood vessels throughout your body, often stiffening and damaging them. And as a byproduct, setting the stage for a laundry list of not cool for longevity school happenings, including basically every cardiovascular problem in the book. We're talking heart disease, congestive heart failure, atherosclerosis, coronary artery disease, stroke, cognitive dysfunction, memory and vision loss, kidney disease, and every dude's worst nightmare, erectile dysfunction. Yeah. And it turns out, despite everybody and their grandmother defaulting to chronic psychological stress as the primary cause for this silent killer, there is much more to this origin story. In fact, there is some pretty solid and growing evidence that one of its main pathways may track back to the smelliest place on Earth, the gut, and more specifically, the trillions of microorganisms that reside in it. Yep. Those little guys may be making your little guy less effective. And we have a new study which just hit the scientific streets, which displays this ever so elegantly. No, not the little guy part, the hypertension part. Although, I guess they are connected. Also highlighting a potential solution that is probably worth trying today. Let's check it out. Researchers out of Harbin Medical University in China explored this connection using a very elegant methodology which incorporated both humans and animals to see if one of the most extreme versions of hypertension, called resistant hypertension, could be resolved via a series of strategic lifestyle interventions. And you may be wondering, what the hell is resistant hypertension? Well, it's when hypertension does not get resolved by standard medication, staying stubborn, problematic, and dangerous despite the pharmacological treatment, which makes it one of the most severe versions and challenging to solve. Something that enticed this research team to try out one of the most biological modulating interventions on the market to see if it could make a difference. This intervention being none other than intermittent fasting, and more specifically an early 16-8 protocol, something we've talked all about in previous deep dives like this one. Here, participants began energy consumption at 8 a.m. and finished by 4 p.m. over the course of 3 consecutive weeks, consuming customized isocaloric meals comprised of 20 to 30% fat, 20 to 30% protein, and 40 to 60% carbohydrates, totaling about 1,500 calories daily, which, for the average person, would also make this a caloric restriction intervention as well, even though the researchers didn't call this out. And in terms of measurements, participants had blood pressure recorded twice daily at 8 a.m. and 8 p.m., along with a full microbiome and metabolic analysis at the beginning and end of the protocol to see if any changes derived from the gut could be influencing the changes observed in blood pressure. If, of course, there were any changes. in blood pressure. And since we're on the topic of changes, at the end of 3 weeks, they found the early intermittent fasting protocol significantly reduced blood pressure in these resistant hypertension patients. Interesting. But how? Well, a few of the variables that also changed during this period were the subject's microbiome and metabolome, or composition of gut microbes, as well as the metabolites they produce, with researchers specifically observing an increase in the species Akkermansia municiphala and Adlocartia equilifacinus, as well as a decrease in lipopolysaccharides, or LPSs, and trimethylamine N oxide, or TMAO levels, and increase in short-chain fatty acids. And if you recall our discussion from this, How Our Gut Ages Us, powwow, you'd recall that lipopolysaccharides, or LPSs, are bacterial components that can sneak into circulation if the gut wall is weak and permeable, and as a byproduct drive inflammation, cellular dysfunction, and ultimately accelerated aging. Yeah, not cool. And trimethylamine N oxide, or TMAOs, are inflammatory compounds which get synthesized in the gut and are associated with some of the gnarliest diseases we humans face, including cardiovascular disease and hypertension. So, having less of these two things circulating is a positive thing. And on the opposite front, short-chain fatty acids have been found to be super beneficial for cellular function and vitality. So, overall, this protocol was strongly associated with favorable changes across the board. But is this evidence really strong enough to implicate the gut as a major, or dare I say causal modulator of hypertension? I don't know. Which is exactly why the researchers took the next leg of the study to a mouse model. Well, actually, rat model, but who's keeping track? Here they transferred the microbiomes of spontaneously hypertensive rats resistant to anti-hypertensive drugs into germ-free non-hypertensive rodents to see if they would develop resistant hypertension. And wouldn't you know it, they did. And to see if they could alleviate this disease in these rats, they then supplemented them with a probiotic of those two bacterial species we chatted about before, finding that it significantly lowered their blood pressure. You don't say. And at this point, the researchers proceeded to do what any logical scientific team would do and supplemented the human patients with the probiotic, specifically Akkermansia municiphala, finding that it reduced blood pressure while normalizing LPSs, TMAOs, and short-chain fatty acids. And at this point, I know what you're thinking. Those gosh darn microbes at it again. Having the team conclude that their findings provide both clinical and mechanistic evidence supporting intermittent fasting and probiotics as important modulators of blood pressure regulation, and adding more evidence to my claim that happy microbes equal happy, healthy humans. Now, I must call out, this was a small study. It did not have a control group, and it could very well have had other variables at play like the caloric restriction. So, as like most of these super cool studies, more is needed to further validate and expand on these potential causal effects. That being said, this does not mean you shouldn't start doing things here and now to improve your cellular, metabolic, and microbiotic situation. You most certainly should. So let's talk about how. And yeah, I did make up that last word, but it's my YouTube channel, so I'm allowed to. So when it comes to impactful action items, the simple answer here is do all the things that make your heart more efficient, blood vessels more relaxed, immune system more precise and specific, gut wall more resilient, microbiome more diverse, and cellular self more efficient. And I say simple because all of this is much easier said than done. Because as we know, the hard part is always the execution. Being consistent enough to drive these internal changes and thus drive feeling how you're capable of feeling. But If there were some low-hanging fruit or intervention that anybody could start right here, right now, that would provide the biggest health bang for its buck without overhauling your entire life overnight, it would probably be focusing on the window in which you consume your meals, aka a strategic meal timing protocol, or what others may call intermittent fasting, because a growing mountain of evidence supports the notion that consuming said energy in an 8-hour window or less, and then proceeding to fast for the 16 hours thereafter until the next day, has some pretty profound cellular and metabolic effects, from mitochondria efficiency and the downregulation of inflammation to a re-architecture of one's gut microbiome. In fact, there are so many effects that we have a whole playlist filled with 70 plus videos talking about them. Yeah, I've been doing this a while. Now, here's the interesting part. These benefits seem to be more significant for people who are starting from a place of poorer habits. For example, someone who eats the typical modern ultra-processed diet and never exercises will likely see more upside compared to someone who already has their health dialed in, making the case for a protocol like this even more compelling for the average Joe and Jane. And all you have to do to start is identify an 8 to 10 hour window in which you're going to consume all of your energy in each day. And if you want to add even more upside, there's also evidence suggesting that moving this window a little earlier in the day makes it even more beneficial, for reasons that we talk all about in that previous mentioned video, which you can also find in the show notes below. Now, I also need to make it undeniably clear that intermittent fasting is not a silver bullet, because nothing is. True cellular and metabolic health, and thus vitality, is achieved with a holistic lifestyle strategy. One which promotes not only a healthy cellular self, but a healthy quasi-self, aka microbiome, as well. And this requires prioritizing real whole nourishing foods, loaded with the microbiome favorite dietary fiber, high quality circadian aligned sleep, which you simply cannot operate to your true potential without, daily badonkadonking, aka exercise, more time outside with nature, and a conscious avoidance of all those toxins that are commonly found in everyday life. And ironically, all of this happens to be probably the most impactful way to reduce stress and lower blood pressure. I like to call it proactive stress management, or making it biochemically harder to become stressed out in the first place. Hacking the problem before it is a problem. And when you hit this expert level, combining it with habits such as meditation, breathwork, and mindfulness, becoming a better observer and manager of your mind, as we discuss in this video here, you become as cool as a cucumber. And although this may sound like a lot and a lofty mountain to climb, remember, it's the daily steps that get you there. So take it day by day, one change at a time, and enjoy the journey of finally beginning to operate to your true potential. You're clenching again. Yeah, I didn't notice until I just saw. So, let it drop. Chill out. Take a breath. You got this.